Hi everybody, welcome back. This is part 2 of how to make a homemade pizza. I'm Stuart, and before we went over the ingredients, so now we're going to go ahead and roll out the dough. As I mentioned, we've got a 16-ounce ball of pizza dough here, and we roll it out to the size of our pizza screen, which we like to cook better with. As you can see, it cooks through the bottom. It's lets all the heat get to the bottom so the bottom will crisp up. If you get frozen dough rather than the fresh, it will probably fit better because it's a 14-ounce on this 14-inch pizza pan. These are certainly more readily available at your grocery store. They're $3 for $1.50. If you put the pizza dough on this, make sure you got a good dusting of flour on here, and again, in center rack. Now, let me put this over to the side. And what we want is a good clean and flat surface. We get on a good amount of your standard white flour, because pizza dough is obviously sticky. And also something else, when you thaw the dough, it's best to keep it in the refrigerator, because if you leave it out all day long, if it gets to room temperature, it's going to get really a little too elastic, a little too soft. If it's still cold, it's going to have better consistency, easier to work with. And also, if you leave it out all day, the dough will rise. Sometimes when you buy it fresh, if you've got it in the bag looks like it's going to pop just because the dough's been rising all day, and it's just not as easy to work with. So anyway, what you want to do is get this as round as possible, just to start with it, just so you're going to wind up with a round pizza that's going to fit on your pizza screen the best it can. First, one thing you want to do is start getting the crust essentially in place. So you just kind of want to pinch it around the edge. And you can see I'm just putting a little edge on it. And depending, again, this is so much preference. If you want a big crust, pinch out a bigger crust. But we like to put most of our toppings and sauce and cheese to the edge. So we like to have a smaller crust. And you can see as I'm spinning it around a little bit, it's already getting a little bit larger. So just, again, keep it round, start mushing it out a little bit more. Some people might be a little bit more comfortable using a rolling pin the first couple times, but since I worked at a pizza place when I was a kid, I kind of like doing this by hand. So, and you see a few bubbles coming out, you want to make sure you pop them, otherwise they could turn into big bubbles when it goes into the oven and cooks. So again, just keep that crust going, keep it as round as you can, and this is where you want to start stretching it out by hand. You start just pulling your knuckles out, and you want to make sure there's enough flour on it to keep it from sticking to your knuckles, because you want to make sure you don't get too many thin spots. You want to keep it as even as possible. When you go to the pizza store, you always see people throwing it up in the air. That's fun and all, but if you don't have as much experience, you might just put your hands right through it. So again, just try and pull it out. You can probably see my knuckles on the inside. Run it from both sides, just make sure it's still sliding around. If you do see a couple thin spots like right here, just try and avoid them and try and work on the perimeter of it. So again, we're trying to get this out to about 16 inches, and you can see it's elastic, so it'll kind of pull back. We're getting about the right size. You want to move this flour to the side, because if you get a bunch of flour underneath of it, when you put it into the oven, that dusting of flour will fall on the bottom of the oven, and it will smoke and set off your smoke detector. So we don't want that. So we get it pretty much about to the perimeter here, and we did pretty good. And as you can see, it is elastic, so it'll start pulling back. And we'll just kind of pull it out. And what you want to do is you want to wait until your oven is preheated before you put your sauce on. So this is almost to the end. What you want to do is take a fork and just run around and just poke little holes in it. As I mentioned, if there's a few bubbles in there just from the dough rising, if you put it in the oven, they're potentially going to get large bubbles. So you just want to pop them ahead of time, so if they do start to rise, they'll pop on their own. And you're pretty much all set. So this is going to be the end of video number 2. Like I said, just put holes in the whole thing, and you should be all set. So we'll see you on part 3 on putting on some toppings.